believe we have 20 minutes or so for questions, Laurie, if that's okay. So I'll just, to save time, if anyone wants to indicate, I'll take them myself. Yes, please.
Are there any signs that the British public may a rebellion against the National Health Service?
Do you know, yes and no. Yes and no. There is a sort of battered wife syndrome with the NHS. People know that it's a bad system, but they are scared of the alternatives. And they've been conditioned, like a battered wife, into not being able to think outside their existing unhappy reality. So if you say to people in an opinion poll, do you think that we should move from the NHS towards an American-style insurance-based system, then the majority will say no. But if you say to them, would you have private health insurance if you could afford it? Which seems to me the pertinent question, you get more than 90% saying yes. In other words, when they actually ask themselves the question, rather than saying what is the socially correct attitude, plainly they have moved on. Now, I've got to say, I'm speaking to you as an individual and as a backbencher. It is not my party's policy to make radical changes in the British healthcare system. And indeed, whenever I say these things in the US, it takes about 4 seconds before the health secretary leaps up and says, he's deriding our NHS, he's attacking our hard-working doctors and nurses. And I say, no, come on, of course I'm not attacking our hard-working doctors. I'm not even attacking our lazy doctors, who by definition must also exist if you have hard-working ones. You know, all I'm saying is that we could do better, and that the good people in a bad system would still be good people, but would be doing better in a more responsive system. But that's, you know, you will not find many people prepared openly, many politicians in Britain prepared openly to say what I'm going to say. I also want to say one thing in defense of my party leader, who doesn't share my views on this. His experience of the NHS has been very different from mine. David Cameron had a very severely handicapped son who needed 24-hour round-the-clock care, and who tragically died a few months ago, age 6. The NHS, and in this it probably accurately reflects the values of society, although this is no excuse for it. The NHS is pretty good with children, although it's awful with elderly people. I mean, I could tell you horror stories about people left unattended in beds, not properly fed, not having their beds changed. But when there is a sick child, they will generally move mountains to try and help. So David's experience, first of all, his local hospital is in Oxford. It's one of the best in the United Kingdom. It's where all the top researchers are. Secondly, his experience was as the father of a sick child. Thirdly, and I'm sorry to have to say this, his experience was as a rising politician who they were trying to make a good impression on. So his personal experience of the NHS has been very different from that of a lot of other people. And partly for that reason, he is committed to the existing model. So in the short term, no, I don't see a change. But yes, I do think public opinion is turning against it. Yes, please, sir.
Yes, sir. This last year, my former secretary's father, he was a World War II veteran, passed away from kidney failure. He'd been on dialysis here in the States for some 19 or 20 years. He died in his upper 80s. When I was a student 19 years ago at University of Kent, Canterbury, I was in a conversation, I can't recall the age cutoff, but there was a cutoff for senior citizens in Britain for kidney dialysis. And I was just wondering if you recall that age cutoff, or some other tragic thing such as that, where you're just too old, you age out, you don't get treatment, go away and die, happens to be the circumstances, and the sorry lot for the elderly, as you just mentioned, in the system.
But it can't be otherwise within a state-run system with limited resources. These things don't happen because the system is run by monsters. They happen because you've got to draw the line somewhere. And if the decision rests with a state committee, rather than with the private consumer of healthcare, they have got to make what they see as rational decisions about what we can afford and what we can't afford. And it isn't always life and death things. And one of the very recent things was a denial of painkillers to people, cortisone, because they couldn't afford it for these cases. There was a case of somebody who was progressively going blind and was told, well, when you have completely lost vision in your eye, then we can treat you. But not until that. So there are, and everyone has his own favourite horror story about this. My particular favourite horror story at the moment is a man who had 3 times survived a malignant cancer, and then, as he was completing his chemotherapy successfully on the final go, he picked up a bug in a dirty hospital and was killed by it. I mean, that's the reality. And of course, I'm not saying that is unique to the British system. I'm just saying he couldn't do anything about it under our system, and that's the real tragedy. Yeah.
Daniel, everyone in this room knows that the words public option and co-op and government exchange is the government bureaucrat way of saying we're going to get to single payer eventually. Maybe not this year, but in 5 years and in 10. We all know this. The proponents of that system still claim to the American public, oh no, it's not single payer, oh no, you're still going to have choices, don't believe those crazy right-wingers, they don't know what they're talking about. Under the stimulus bill, President Obama set up a competitive effectiveness research board. He's also set up an IT board to track everybody's medical records and put a very sort of leftist, we should not give the elderly people care guy in charge of this. You have in England, you have NICE, you have quality, you have all these things. Could you just sort of walk us through a little bit about the basis that you need in order to have a single payer and how you see that relating to where we're going here?
I'm not the expert on where you're going here. But as I say, the thing takes on a momentum of its own. Once you begin to say the state is going to look after these people on these terms, it becomes very hard for anybody else to compete. You know, it's in the same way that happened with the bank nationalizations. You could say we're going to take over this one bank because it's in trouble. All right, but then what? Then the depositor has a choice between a bank that is backed by the taxpayer and one that isn't. Well, which one is he going to choose? Same thing with healthcare. The state becoming a competitor alongside non-state actors is an elephant getting into a rowing boat. It unbalances the whole thing. You know? And so even if that isn't their intention, they're going to end up with a system like ours where it becomes, if not the only model, certainly the only realistic model for all but very wealthy people who can afford to buy their way out. And by the way, that will be bad for everybody. I mean, it will make the poor worse off as well. The argument that's used, as I understand it, is, well, this is all very well for the people who can afford insurance, but what about the uninsured? Well, even the people who can't afford to make their own choices with insurance will still benefit if standards generally have been driven up by choice and competition from those who can afford it. So even they, what you'll end up with is a system where everyone has been dragged down to the lowest level, which is roughly what we have in the UK. The only thing I would say is, I'm not sure that I'm as pessimistic about this as some of you in this room. I don't detect any appetite among the general public of this country. I think they've seen through some of the more spurious claims that were being advanced by proponents of change. And in any case, people understand that even if at a time, when Clinton tried something similar, it was at a time of generally rising prosperity. It was the beginning of a period of great growth with tax revenues coming in. Maybe the country could have afforded something on this scale at a time like that. But at a time like now, when we've already seen this massive expansion of the state sector, this massive shrinkage of the private economy, the idea that you would then take another, eighth, seventh of the whole economy and nationalize that, come on. This wouldn't be America anymore. Yes, please.
A two-part question. Could you tell us how the British public opinion reacted to Neville Chamberlain and Winston Churchill in the late 1930s prior to World War II? And which American presidents in recent years are closer to Churchill compared to Neville Chamberlain?
Well, Churchill's a very good example of somebody who was deeply unpopular in his own party. He was somebody who would have done very badly under the existing system, where the values that are most treasured in a politician are what you call in England bottom, which means a sense of sort of dignity and judgment. And what it really means is waiting until everyone else has spoken before you express your own opinion. And the men who are thought to have bottom are the ones who rise, and Chamberlain was one such. Churchill was a maverick. He was bugged at one stage by the security services because his party leadership was so against him. And to be fair, he had done some pretty maverick things. I mean, but when the moment came, the public spontaneously demanded a change of leadership. Once again, you saw the good sense of the general population as opposed to their political leaders. There were posters on tubes and at bus stations saying, "Bring back Churchill. Send for Churchill now." And eventually the government was forced to respond to public opinion.